When we think of evil, we often imagine monstrous villains. But what if the greatest horrors aren't committed by sadists, but by ordinary people doing their jobs, simply not thinking? This is the disturbing idea put forth by Hannah Arendt, one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. And it's the subject of today's episode. Welcome to the series. Today we're going to look at the concept of the banality of evil. In particular, how does it work? Why did it matter? And why does it still matter today? Now, before we get into that, let me just say that I will likely not do any episodes about current events or any contemporary philosophers. There are other channels doing that really well. My focus is on major figures of the past who have something to teach us still. So if there's someone alive right now that you'd like me to do an episode about, then please let me know down in the comments. But for now, let's get started. Our story begins in dark times, not just in general, but specifically with the year 1961. That is, because Hannah Arendt was sent by the New Yorker to cover the trial of a man named Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. Now, you might wonder who this guy was and why such a high-profile writer would go to cover his trial. Well, Eichmann was a mid-level bureaucrat in Nazi Germany and he was on trial for war crimes. Specifically, he was convicted of overseeing the logistics of the Holocaust, organizing the deportation of millions of European Jews to death camps where they were murdered. He was essentially a cog in the machinery of Nazi Germany's genocide of European Jews. What makes the story interesting is that Arendt arrived at the trial she expected to see the embodiment of radical evil, a sadist who got pleasure out of the suffering of others, someone who perhaps relished the roundup and murder of millions. But what she actually saw was, well, she described him as terrifyingly normal. Arendt wrote that Eichmann looked like a dim, rather comical little man. He looked ridiculous. In fact, he looked like so many other bureaucrats one has seen at the bank or the post office, so many small, fat, short men with a receding hairline. So she was shocked. She expected a monster and found a clerk, and her shock turned into horror when she listened to the trial. While some of the Nazi leaders were charismatic and driven by hateful ideology, Eichmann came across as someone who was only interested in advancing his career and didn't care about anything else. He simply followed orders and did what he was told. As she watched the trial unfold, Arendt realized that she had just uncovered a new and terrifying kind of evil. Let me try to sum it up with a quote from her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. To some observers in Jerusalem, Eichmann looked very much like a non-Jew, like the type one meets every day in the street, the shopkeeper who overcharges for a piece of bread, the grocer who gives short weight, the waiter who snarls at customers, the porter who knocks down a package or lets himself be bribed to take it out of the baggage car. In fact, that's the way Eichmann behaved in private life. When he talked about his wife or children, he was loud and boisterous. He knew how to make jokes that made the whole room roar with laughter, and he could tell stories with a theatrical flair. So it seems like he was just another guy, a regular Joe, right? What's so terrifying about that? Well, Arendt realized that his ordinariness was exactly what made him so horrifying. Because after the trial ended and she returned home, she wrote about what she had seen and what it meant. And she realized that it meant something terrible about all of us. She began with a definition. By banality, she said, I do not mean that it is something trivial, or that it happens only in trivial circumstances. On the contrary, the feature which distinguishes the new type of evil is its being deeply rooted in a profound thoughtlessness, in a capacity for neither thinking nor feeling ethically. This thoughtlessness is what makes it possible for the new type of evil to manifest itself. So this is her famous idea, that the root of this kind of evil is thoughtlessness, a lack of imagination, an inability to think from the standpoint of someone else, to consider what it is that they are doing and why. Instead, Eichmann and those like him simply went along with the system, blindly following orders and never stopped to think about the consequences. Arendt offered a contrasting idea to explain this new kind of evil. Previously, she said, she thought that radical evil was motivated by a desire to do evil for evil's sake. But the banality of evil was something different, a lack of concern for the good or bad of their actions, a lack of engagement with the world. Now, you might think, great, I don't want to be a thoughtless person, but let's dig a little deeper. Arendt continued, thoughtlessness can be defined as an ability or unwillingness to think from the standpoint of somebody else, to consider what it is that he is doing from the point of view of someone who is not doing it, to ask oneself what the world would be from his standpoint, what his relation to the world would be, what he would experience and feel. This idea of thoughtlessness is at the heart of Arendt's entire body of work. In fact, her magnum opus, The Human Condition, opens with a discussion of labor, work, and action. And only by participating in these three activities can we realize our humanity. Labor is the effort to maintain ourselves and our environment, like building a house or growing food. Work is the effort to create things, like writing a book or crafting a piece of art. And action is our engagement with the world and others, like speaking, listening, persuading, and voting. Thoughtlessness, she believed, is at the root of evil. because it leads us to stop thinking and stop acting and start laboring and working merely for the sake of maintaining the status quo. We stop thinking about the world and what we do and why, and in this way, we turn ourselves into mindless cogs of the machine. That's why, according to Arendt, although Eichmann was able to escape punishment for his crimes for many years, ultimately justice caught up with him because what he did couldn't go without a trace. His crimes were so heinous and obvious that even if he managed to hide forever, the world would eventually know of them. In contrast, his thoughtlessness left a clear and damning record. So what's so important about this idea of the banality of evil? For starters, it reminds us that the worst evils may come not from the most evil people, but from the most ordinary. It warns us against complacency and suggests that we should unassume that evil will wear a mask or look scary or make it obvious. It also encourages us to be vigilant in considering the character of those we put in positions of power and the ideas that we let guide our society. Because while the world should be judged by results, we should also pay attention to the qualities of the agents that produce those results. In addition, the idea of the banality of evil highlights the dangers of bureaucracy, the tendency for large organizations to dehumanize people, both those who work in them and those who interact with them. Bureaucracies reduce people to numbers and statistics, leading to a loss of concern for the dignity and value of individual human beings. Arendt warned against the seductive allure of bureaucracy, noting that its initial appeal lies in offering security and stability. However, this stability comes at the expense of freedom and critical thinking. Within bureaucratic structures, individuals are often encouraged to follow rules and procedures without questioning them, ultimately leading to a dangerous suppression of individuality and critical thought. Finally, Arendt's concept of the banality of evil serves as a reminder of the importance of individual responsibility. Even when operating within bureaucratic systems, each person still has the ability to think and judge for themselves. Although Eichmann claimed to be just following orders, Arendt argued that he could have chosen to stop thinking and therefore to stop participating in the horrible plan of the Nazis. Each of us has the ability to think and to decide what to do about the state of the world. And in this way, Arendt believed, we are always responsible for our actions. As she wrote, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the fanatic communist, but precisely the indifferent man who has no opinions and who cannot be roused to action unless kicked in the pants. So Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil challenged conventional notions of what constitutes evil, emphasizing instead the danger posed by ordinary people who conform to authority without critical thought or moral reflection. But why does it still matter today? Well, unfortunately, examples of the banality of evil abound in the world even today. People like John Demjanjuk, who worked as a guard at the Treblinka concentration camp during World War II, overseeing the killings of thousands. They later called him Ivan the Impersonal for his callous efficiency in carrying out his duties. Or the infamous My Lai massacre of Vietnamese civilians by US soldiers in 1968. The list goes on, even outside of war and genocide. And Arendt's idea helps us understand people who participate in gossip or bullying or spreading propaganda, or who simply refuse to speak up against injustice and stand up for what is right. Her concept of the banality of evil continues to resonate today, because it reminds us that the capacity for evil is not limited to exceptional individuals. It's something that can emerge from the most ordinary of circumstances and people. It's a testament to the fragility of our humanity and the constant vigilance required to preserve it. As Arendt herself said, we must learn to think again. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to Hannah Arendt and her fascinating concept of the banality of evil. If you're interested in learning more about her life and ideas, there are plenty of resources available. Just search for her name plus biography of philosophy in ULL. Find lots of articles and videos that can help you delve deeper into her work. You can also check out my channel for more philosophical content. Before you go though, let me leave you with one final thought. Arendt's idea of the banality of evil challenges us all to examine our own capacity for thoughtlessness and the potential dangers it poses. Ask yourself, in what ways do we, in our own lives, risk becoming thoughtless? How can we cultivate active thought and judgment in a complex world? Your answers to these questions may just hold the key to understanding not only Arendt's profound ideas, but also our own roles in shaping a better future.